We are here today to have a chat with Keith Wolahan MP. He's been very kind to give us his time to answer a few questions.
Pleasure.
Now, could you please tell us a bit about yourself, where you were born, and how did you enter politics?
Like most people in this electorate, I wasn't born in Australia. I was born in Ireland and came out with my family, my parents and my brothers, and we settled in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, went to public schools out here, which I'm very grateful for, went to university, had two careers, one in the army as a commando officer, which took me to East Timor and Afghanistan several times, and then a longer career as a commercial barrister in court. I entered politics for two reasons. One is a sense of curiosity. I'm excited and interested in the world, and I always read the papers every day, and so I find politics interesting. It matters. But the other was a sense of service. Service always matters to me, and as a migrant, I always looked for a way to give back. I thought the army was one way, but I think serving in politics, you get to do that at scale.
Very passionate about it. What are your plans and priorities for the next term?
I guess the first thing is I don't take that for granted that I get a next term. That's up to the people of Menzies, and I think it's important that they know that I never take that for granted. So we'll see what happens at the next election. If I'm given the honour of being the representative for a second term, my first priority will always be to the electorate. In each federal electorate, there are 170,000 people, 120,000 of which are adults who vote. But I see my task to represent everyone. So they will always come first, before me, before my party, and before any particular cause. So I take that very seriously. I think people are doing it really tough at the moment. A lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck. I hear of families putting food back on the shelf. And I think we need to do better to ease that pressure from families, because when it has real life consequences. For instance, there's many food banks in the electorate, and they've never been at greater capacity than they are now. And this is Australia in 2025. So I think in the short term, we really need to get our economy back on track to take that pressure off families. And that will be my priority.
Now, the next one. How do you plan to support the Persian-speaking and multicultural communities?
To be your representative to the best of my abilities. I'm very proud to represent a seat that has the largest Persian community in Australia. And I've got to know the community well, and I'm still learning. I'm looking forward to Nowruz coming up again, and I know there's a big festival here in Roughy Lake. I'm looking forward to that. But just speaking to the community, it's a very passionate, highly educated, entrepreneurial, hardworking, and generous community. And so when I think of all of the different things that make Australia a great country, we are even better because of the Persians, particularly here. So I'm learning more from the Persian community probably than they are from me. And I just want to be your advocate. And that starts with listening and constantly engaging.
Thank you. What role do you see yourself playing in advancing democracy and human rights?
The most important thing we can do is to practice what we preach. There is a lot of injustice in the world, and we see that in Iran as well. But we mustn't take for granted what we have here, and to make sure that we practice our democracy and protect human rights to the best of our abilities. Because it's not normal in human history for us to live in the way that we do. Human civilizations tend to see power concentrated. They tend to see majorities abuse minorities. And so we must always be eternally vigilant. I think one of the challenges in a multicultural democracy is that we try and find more of what unites us together as Australians. And so I think it's very important that we lean into that and that we explain that we are all one family in Australia. It'd be very easy for particularly outside groups to seek to tear us apart. So I always, wherever I can, lean into the things that unify us. And I know the symbols of, our anthem and our flag, I think they're very important for that because they represent everyone and they represent everyone equally. And I think we can do that combination well of people being proud of where they come from and also recognising that I'm all equally proud of where we're going as Australians.
What initiative do you have to improve the local economy and create job opportunities?
Our economy here, as a big part of Melbourne, is driven by the national economy. But there are particular aspects of Victoria and Melbourne that are doing it tougher than the rest of Australia. I sit on the House Economics Committee, so we get to speak to the big bank CEOs and the Reserve Bank regularly. And whilst there is a national per capita recession, we've had 7 quarters of negative growth, Victoria is doing it extra tough. So if you're running a small business in Victoria, you have extra taxes, more red tape, and you are struggling to compete with some of the big build projects, particularly if you're hiring staff. Very hard for a small business to offer the same conditions that, say, the government does on North East Link or Suburban Rail Loop. And a lot of those businesses then have to close. We don't see them open up again. So I think the first thing is to recognise it's very tough at the moment, particularly for Victoria. And whether at a state or a federal level, we need to get Victoria's non-government economy moving again. And that really means unleashing the entrepreneurial talent that we have. And I know in the Persian community, there's some amazing entrepreneurs who are not only starting small businesses, but our future medium and big businesses. And we need to unleash that talent because it's there. It's just being choked in red tape and tax and debt at the moment.
Lastly, I would like to name a few countries and figures. Could you share your thoughts on them with a brief sentence?
Sure.
First, China.
Well, this also happens to be a diaspora that is the largest in Australia here in the community. So to the credit of the government, and I will always say when the government does things well, I think their summary of we will cooperate where we can and disagree where we must, I think that is a fair summary. All nation states act in their own interests, and Australia has mutual interests in trade, but we also have areas where we disagree, particularly on some national security decisions. And I think we can put those in our national interest and then still maintain a commercial relationship where we must. So I think it's about balance, and it's about negotiating in our interest based on values with our eyes wide open. Not one sentence, but it's a complicated one. Yeah.
Sure. Iran, even more complicated.
It is. On the one hand, it's very emotional because when I speak highly of our Iranian diaspora, I think of the lost potential for the world. Imagine that was unleashed for Iran. It would be a beacon of prosperity, of security. It would actually be a different world. And so I think those who value peace and security and freedom in the world, it's everyone's cause. And so I would love to see Iran reach its potential because it's an amazing country with beautiful people. It's just, it's for many decades, it hasn't been allowed to have that potential, particularly for women. And we know the late Christopher Hitchens, I think he said it on Q&A. He said, we know the cure to poverty. It is the liberation of women. And any civilization that doesn't free women will never be as prosperous and secure as it could be. And so I think of Iran in one sentence, the lost potential.
Afghanistan?
That's heartbreaking for me. Same, that in a country that has so much potential, but it has regressed to brutal oppression of women, where can't even leave the house, can't go to school. And I, as someone who spent much of my life there, I feel like we, as a coalition and NATO, took its eye off how a war ends. So it's one thing to prosecute a war for 20 years, but that could have ended in a really different way. But we live in a federation here where we have, if you're from Victoria, we're quite different to Queenslanders, but we all belong to the one country. In Afghanistan, those Pashtuns from the south in Kandahar are quite different to Hazarans from the north, or if you're from Kabul. And I think one of the lost opportunities in Afghanistan was a federation which would have allowed people who were quite different to have some common identity. And then in the final negotiation with the Taliban, which probably would have occurred anyway, it didn't have to be an all or nothing proposition. It could have been Taliban controlled South, which is their heartland, but the rest of Afghanistan didn't have to be subject to that. And you could have had maybe a UN peacekeeping force keeping the peace for a while. For that not to have been considered was a great disappointment for all of the sacrifice, including personal friends who died in Afghanistan. I think that's a great tragedy, but we should learn from that.
England?
England, I think England's gift to the world has been, there are many, its institutions. No nation is perfect, but its institutions of the common law, property rights, parliamentary democracy, and then in culture, and Shakespeare and Charles Dickens, the language we're speaking right now, I think what England did pre the Industrial Revolution and then through the Industrial Revolution still echoes through the world. And so I have as many relatives in England as I do in Ireland. So I love visiting England, and I studied my master's there as well.
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump. I think everyone's talking about Donald Trump. He's an interesting and complicated character. He's also a divisive character in the sense that people have strong opinions either way on him. He is the democratically elected president of the United States, and we will always respect another democracy's decision like that. He has an American first agenda, and that has always been the case, but he doesn't hide it. He doesn't use diplomatic language to cover it. He's brutally honest in it. And our task as Australians is to have an Australian first agenda, but we've got to navigate that. So I think in prosecuting what's in our interests, we have to attach a US interest and make it known. So that's, Donald Trump, he's here for the next few years, but, it's a different presidency than the first one. And there's challenges and opportunities that come with that, but we're working our way through. But he's a transformative figure, for good or bad. He's a transformative figure. And you saw that in the first few weeks of his presidency. He didn't sit in the office and do nothing.
Anthony Albanese.
Anthony Albanese I think he's a decent person. He's a good man. I don't think he's quite cut out for being Prime Minister. And not everyone is. They can't be. That's the nature of being Prime Minister. I think he has given many decades of service to the Parliament, but there were times when you expected the Prime Minister to step up and show leadership, and he was found wanting. Again, that's not because he's a bad person. I just think this hasn't quite worked out for him. But I hope if he is re-elected, I hope it's a different second term, and you see more of, I think you see more forceful, strong leadership from him, because I always put the nation first, and his success is our success. But at the moment, I think he has disappointed many people, including his own supporters.
Peter Dutton.
He's a kinder, softer person than he's often portrayed. So in politics, we often see people painted as a cartoon image or a caricature of what they are. And that goes both ways. I said nice things about Anthony Albanese, but equally, Peter Dutton's in politics for the right reasons. He's had portfolios over the years that have meant he's often had a tough guy image. But I have sat like we are now with him in very emotional meetings where there's no press, and he has shown who the real Peter Dutton is. And he's a person who cares, and he's a good leader. But no one's perfect. None of us are. But I think he has the potential to be a very good Prime Minister if he's given that chance.
Putin,
another complicated figure. Yeah.
You can't do this one in one sentence, can you?
No, you can't. Not at all. I think of Putin as the very essence of sort of like raw power politics in the most brutal way, whether it's domestically within Russia, but also the invasion of Ukraine. And I think Vladimir Putin, he speaks in the language of power, reacts to power. And one of the additional tragedies of Afghanistan, the way that ended, I think that sent a signal to him that it is that the West, for want of a better word, doesn't have the stamina to stand up for another nation at the end of a conflict. And I'm worried we're repeating that with Ukraine right now. I'm worried that the mistakes at the end of the Afghanistan negotiation are repeating themselves here. So all wars mostly end in a negotiation or a capitulation. There's going to be no capitulation here, so it's a negotiation. Negotiations have terms, and you can either negotiate from strength or weakness. And Vladimir Putin thinks in terms of strength. I'm worried that the Ukrainian negotiation is coming from a place of weakness now. And the worry for that is that it incentivizes similar actions in the coming decades. And that's not in anyone's interest.
That concludes our questions. Thank you kindly for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Hopefully we'll see you soon.
Love to.